Hello, everybody. Welcome to another installment of Biology in the Basement with your host, Mr. Andraco. As you can see, we have an old school warm up here on the board. We're gonna need some prior knowledge to start the reproductive unit. So I've got a bunch of questions I want to go over with you, so that we can remember what we talked about and apply it to how it works in the human body. Because there's the cellular level, which we've gone over already, and now we're going to apply that cellular level and take it to the full human body and how humans are able to reproduce and develop and care for offspring. We get through the whole deal. We even finish what I like to call the rectangle of life. So, the purpose of this video is today to just go over the parts of the male and female reproductive system, as well as talk about a few other terms. And that will be done, of course, after we hit the warm-up. So, we need a fact of the day so that we can get started. And here it is. Play-Doh was actually used as a cleaner of walls and wallpaper when coal was used to heat homes, right? Trucks used to back up and you'd have a coal chute right into your house, and apparently Play-Doh was the cleaner for the walls. And they were near bankruptcy after World War II when coal was phased out by natural gas, and they just decided to pivot to making it a children's toy, and they became one of the most successful toys of all time. I mean, you can still buy Play-Doh today, and that was quite a long time when they were gone. So hats off to Play-Doh for improvising, adapting, adjusting. So before we get started as well, I wanted to show you the Gizmo gadget. This was my latest Lego creation. We were doing all different kinds of trucks and boats and cars and houses and stations and things like that. And then we said, let's just make a Gizmo gadget. And it turns out that I figured out that my Gizmo gadget has the ability to cure the coronavirus. And let me just show you how it works, okay? Now, it's actually meant to be held kind of like a magic wand, like this. Okay, now if you look really, really closely through the eye of the top, there is a red gem there. Now, when the sun projects through the red gem, it will charge up this wand, the Gizmo gadget itself, right? So on the right day at the right time, I don't know, corona means like sunset or sunlight, I don't know. Anyways, or the brightest sun, or anyways. If I'm using the right gem and I can charge up the Gizmo gadget just enough, it should have enough power to launch this little inoculator into the sky high enough to cure the entire world. I don't know if you can see it very closely, but this weird looking alien head has below it a little syringe full of the cure. And so what it's used for is to get charged up by the sun, and once the energy is at full power, boom, right? Cure the coronavirus. Who knew when I was just building this simple old Gizmo gadget that I would figure out how to cure the coronavirus. So now we just got to wait for the right sunny day and the right time, and hopefully this is the right gem. I got a couple backup gems over here that I installed. So yeah, it's very user friendly. I put some smooth pieces on the bottom, so it's got a nice comfy hand grip, so you can hold it up to the sun just right, and get that direction and that flow. So, you guys can thank me later for curing the coronavirus. All right, hopefully you ignored all that, and we're looking at these questions, because this is what we need to understand before we really talk about the human body and how it reproduces. These are terms we've already gone over, right? First one, I'll just leave this here. First one is what are gametes, and give us some examples, right? Gametes, if you remember, are those haploid or half cells, like sperm and egg, right? Where do they come from? They come from what were called gonads, right? Gamete producing organs, things like ovaries and testes. Not to mention, right, the anther and the ovary of plants also produce pollen and ovules in the same form of sexual reproduction, right? How much DNA do they contain? Well, they contain only 50%, right? Through the process of meiosis, we get two half cells, right? 50% of DNA here, 50% of DNA here. They join through a process called fertilization, right? And that you're seeing right there is fertilization, where egg meets sperm. And this, of course, forms the first cell called the zygote, which is now where we go from two half cells to one brand new whole cell, right? A full set of DNA. If you remember, right, we had sex cells and body cells. Body cells were also called somatic cells, and these guys, gametes, were called germ cells, right? When the two correct germ cells combine, chromosomes line up, we get a new offspring, right? We also talked in evolution how sexual reproduction is important because it leads to increased variation to help these changes in the environment. So, we will talk about the male side first, then we'll talk about the female side and how they are able to produce reproductive cells, but also how the female's body is designed to house, nourish the fetus, and nourish the baby after birth. So, just give it up to women. All right, on the male side, we've got the testes. As we've talked briefly, they produce testosterone, which starts the whole process of puberty and sperm production. Now, the penis is obviously the organ that ensures that the sperm makes it inside of the female counterpart. This is much more successful than, say, how the birds do it. Birds have just what's called a cloaca. It's just a multi-purpose hole where they just kind of mash their cloacas together and kind of hope that gravity does the business, not to be too disgusting or anything, but that's really how it works. The scrotum, the next one, this is the sac that holds the testes at a cool temperature. Our inner body temperature, right, is supposed to be 98.6. The sperm cells like it a little cooler, and that's why our testes are on the outside of the body. It doesn't make any sense to have our testicles outside of the body since they're carrying, they're just as delicate as other internal organs, and they're carrying, what is going to go on to the next generation. But they need to be kept at a cooler temperature, so they are kept outside the body. Of course, the scrotum is a good example of homeostasis that is often left off the Regents exam because it is also a organ that reacts in high temperature and low temperature situations because the scrotum, right, needs to keep the sperm cool, and so on hot days it will retract to keep the testes further away from the warm body. But if it is cold outside, the scrotum will contract and hold the testes closer to the body to keep that sperm a little bit warmer on cold days. They always leave it off the Regents exam, but I feel it's a good example of homeostasis on both sides. But we'll move on. The epididymis is just a very small pouch that holds the sperm. The testis itself is very solid. It is not holding all, it is not just stuffed full of sperm. There's just a little pouch on the top that a small amount of sperm will carry. And then that will travel to the vas deferens, then out through the urethra. The urethra, of course, is in males a multi-purpose tube where males urinate as well as ejaculate through. So as you can see here, it all starts at the testy, where the testicles produce the sperm. It sits on top here of the epididymis for when the time comes. It travels all the way up through, and it joins up with the seminal vesicle. Right? We're going to talk about the difference of sperm and semen in the next video, but at this point, these are just the sperm cells traveling up to join up with the semen that is the fluid that makes the ejaculate. The prostate here is the pump that will pump the semen out of the body, as well as urine, because as you can hopefully see, it's attached to the bladder going here, and it's attached to the seminal vesicle. Another important gland here is the bulbourethral gland. The bulbourethral gland will secrete what is called pre-ejaculate, what they call pre-cum, maybe that you may have heard, and that is what conditions the urethra after urine has passed through it, more acidic, so that the sperm can travel through the urethra in a higher pH, a less acidic environment. And so that is what the bulbourethral gland is for. On the female side, females, it all begins in the ovaries, right? This is where the eggs are produced, and as well, we get 2 of the 4 hormones that regulate the menstrual cycle, but estrogen and progesterone do ever so much more. But that's where they are created and distributed. After the ovaries, we have our fallopian tube, often called the oviduct. This is that passageway from the ovary to the uterus. The important thing that you need to know here is this is actually the site where fertilization occurs. It doesn't occur in the ovary. The ovary is still a solid object where the eggs are being held. It is when the egg is released, ovulation, as it travels down the fallopian tube, it ends up in the uterus already fertilized. The uterus is what we refer to as the womb. This is the tissue that receives the fertilized egg, and if it is fertilized, it will begin to form a womb. If it is not, we'll talk about the menstrual cycle and what happens to reset the schedule. The cervix is just the narrower neck of the uterus. It's just what the doctors are normally looking at to see the dilation. When you hear about how many centimeters dilated, they're talking about the cervix because it's usually very narrow, except for when the baby is being born, it widens up so that the baby can pass through the birth canal, aka the vagina. So here is just one half. Okay, there's a whole nother complementary side over here, but I use this so it's a little bit bigger so you can see, right? It shows how there are both horns, as they say. Anyways, inside of the ovary is a follicle. The follicle is a whole sac of a couple hundred cells. Their job is to prepare the egg for release. So for the first 14 days, they prepare the egg for release, and then the egg releases. It is swept into the fallopian tube. Sperm may travel up the fallopian tube and fertilize it, where if it gets fertilized, this is when mitosis begins. It's crazy to think that you at one point were 2 cells, 4 cells, 8 cells, just floating down a little canal of water before you implanted at maybe 150 cells into the uterus. Okay? So that's the basics of kind of fertilization and the pathway. Of course, if the egg is passed and does not get fertilized, it travels out the body, or sometimes it gets into the tissue here, and during menstruation, it is removed from the body. Sometimes it's digested by the body. We've talked a lot about what happens to the egg after, because it's a noticeable cell. Some people say they've seen it. I didn't want to get into that conversation. You know me, I love to talk about anything and everything. This is weird actually having the sex talk with you guys without all the giggling and explaining and fielding all the crazy questions, because nothing was off the table when I used to do this. So feel free to email me with any questions. It's probably going to be awkward, but I'm okay with it. All right, so we will finish on, right, a couple of these terms we just mentioned, which was ejaculation. That is the release of semen from the body. Now, semen itself is a multi-purpose fluid. Semen is, first of all, just the fluid that carries the sperm. Sperm cells are super, super small, and they need a fluid to travel in, and that is the semen. The semen also does a good job of buffering the pH of the vagina. The vagina is very acidic, and semen contains buffers in it, as they're called, which you'll learn next year in chemistry, buffers that help to keep the pH, higher so that the sperm can travel through. If you'll notice, sperm cells are sensitive to pH, so through the urethra, through the vagina, they need to be kept at a set pH so that they can make it to the other side. And that's when fertilization occurs, where sperm and egg join, right? Haploid plus haploid gives us that diploid. The zygote, which is usually the last word of your glossary, but it is the first cell. And on that, I am going to call it a day. I will post your homework on Classroom, and we'll do it to it. All right, have a good one, and Draco out.